Hello and welcome back to Disney Journey. I'm retired Imagineer Jim Shull. If this is your first time viewing my channel, then welcome. But if you're a longtime viewer, subscriber, someone who shares, likes, and hits the bell notification button to become aware of when new episodes drop every single week, you get a special welcome back. In this episode, I want to talk about everyone's favorite pet. And by that, I mean we're going to be continuing our story about the rides of Toy Story Land. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Slinky Dog. And if we're going to talk about Slinky Dog, that means we're going to be talking about Toy Story. That film launched a lot of characters, including, of course, our good friend Slinky Dog. Slinky Dog became a major component, a major player in all the Toy Story lands and Toy Story hotels, not to mention entertainment and parades and things we're not going to talk about in this episode, because we're going to focus on Toy Story Land, because that's where we were introduced to Slinky Dog in a dimensional theme park environment. And the first Toy Story Land, or Playland, was in Paris at the Disney Studios. When the Disney Studios opened, it didn't have a lot there. It had, count them, 1, 2, 3 rides, and that was all. It wasn't until after they opened the park that they decided, you know what we need to do? We need to add stuff. And that's what we started to do. Now, I was grateful because I had the opportunity to deal with the creation of Toon Studios and then Toy Story Playland. And when it came time to dealing with Toy Story Playland, I looked at a menu. I had to come up with a list of rides because, again, this is a park that opened with 3 rides, so adding more rides is only to the good. Slinky Dog fell into the component of being a high-capacity C-ticket attraction. It's fitting that Slinky Dog was born in Germany because the toy was based on a real type of dog, a Dachshund, which is from Germany after all. I found myself on a plane to spend many weeks there in Intamin, in one of their many buildings across Europe, working on the designs. It was an issue and it was a challenge, but it was also an opportunity to bring a favorite character from the first Toy Story movie to life. Even though the character was based on a classic toy, how he was realized in the movie was entirely different. And whatever I did dimensionally for the ride had to reflect both the nature of the toy, but the reality of the movie character. So with my assignment ahead and my bag packed, I boarded the airplane heading for Europe, where I found that I could not make my next airplane transfer because it was snowing. And when it snows, the airport shuts down. I made my way to Intamin via train and a bus. But it doesn't matter because I ended up there. And I ended up at my desk where I spent the next several months developing all the rides for Toy Story Playland. Much of my time on Toy Story Land was spent on Slinky Dog and the development of that ride for reasons we'll be getting into in a minute. But to say it was easy is not the truth. But I can say it wasn't fun. Designing the Slinky Dog ride presented many challenges because the original ride is based on a toy that had been popular for many years. The character, though, in the movie, he looked entirely different. And so I had to respect the toy and the character, with the reality that, after all, at the end of the day, this was going to be a ride that people actually sat in. Developing Slinky Dog was a 50-50 split. 50% of my time was spent drawing, and 50% of my time was spent in meetings about my drawings. Over time, the ideas that we could do emerged. And eventually, I started to land on some ideas and concepts that people started to shake their heads in a positive manner. And I started to see a couple of smiles. The reason this was so much fun, as I said, was that allowed me to stretch my legs in drawing and experimenting and thinking about Slinky Dog and applying some principles of rides I'd done prior to this, but apply them in new and different ways. By now, Slinky Dog had a home in Toy Story Land, so I turned to the folks at Intamin, who've been doing this for a long time. So the process really is the same. You start with a factory, you start to create fiberglass, you get armatures of steel, you mount the fiberglass to that, you start to think about what the ears might be, how do you keep the ears from flapping around and hitting people or guests. Then what color is Slinky Dog? How do you maintain it? How do you put the gel coat on? How do you apply it? What are the rings? Because Slinky Dog has rings. How do you apply them? And those tail. The tail is interesting because the tail is a spring and it moves back and forth. So how do you develop that? You do tests is the answer. And the tests, well, again, get people smiling, going, yes, we can see you doing that. Back to the rings for a moment. Slinky Dog has rings, but it was based on a caterpillar ride, an old classic ride you'd find in trolley and carny parks. I wanted to do a modern version of that ride, but that ride had a hood that came over the ride while it was in motion, hiding the guest view. I thought that was a neat idea. And so there was some work to try to make that happen. Looking at this idea during the feasibility process, quickly it became apparent that as good an idea as it might have been, it just wasn't going to be workable for a variety of reasons. But again, this is why you have a feasibility process step to check yourself to make sure that things like this could be achieved. We also had moving legs, and they had to be powered by a battery, which was right between the head and the tail of Slinky Dog. It was a chargeable battery, and it worked as long as you've got power. Finally, I had a Slinky Dog, just like the movie, just bigger. And Slinky had to go from the factory to Mondeville. This was going to be the first Slinky Dog, but it wasn't going to be the last. Each of the Slinky Dogs is different, and I can think of no better example to give than to talk for a moment about the Lincoln Logs. When the Lincoln Logs were created for the first installation of Slinky Dog in Paris, they were not built on site. No, they were built down the road in a factory outside of Paris. And the way they were done was a concrete mold was created, and it was sectioned off. We first cast the longest length of Lincoln Logs, then block the mold and created the second section, then did it again for the third, and so on. Those, in fact, were brought to the site, and they were assembled just the way you do real Lincoln Logs. They were set on top of each other, and they have a concrete base, and they work like a charm, just like the toys, but just bigger. A common question I get is, what do I like most about being a designer? And the answer is everything. But I got to tell you that I really get a special tingle when I see my designs leap off the page into real life. There's got to be a special place in heaven for a designer who gets to see what he designed or she actually get built, put into concrete for people to enjoy. And such it was with Toy Story Playland and the very first Slinky Dog. It was a big, bright, family-friendly ride, and everyone always rode it with a big smile on their face. It was simple, it was easy, it ran on coaster track. It had little powered motors beneath the coaster track to get it to move. And it worked well, even in all kinds of weather. Because Slinky Dog, he's a good dog. When you buy a Slinky Dog, you get the toy and you get the box and nothing else. It's not like the RC Racer where you get a whole play set. So I had to create my own. Pretending I was Andy, I looked around and I saw Andy's dog's bowl. And so I took that. Andy liked baseball, so I had a baseball to put in the bowl, along with the rubber or plastic chew toys that Andy's dog used. I put Tinker Toys around the outside for lighting and sound, and thus I created a story logic, which was beneficial because once you have the story logic, it opens up your world, but it also limits it because the story logic, once established, can never be violated. There are a few details about Slinky Dog we should run down. One of them is, as I said earlier, there was a space between the head and the tail. That's where the battery pack is. And to keep people from falling in, there's a gate that had to be engineered to rise up so that people couldn't fall in.
But standing back, it was just all worked in the end. Little did I know the second one was around the corner. Before Toy Story Playland could even open to guests there in Paris, I got notification that there was going to be a second one. And could I have meetings with the team that was going to be building it in Hong Kong Disneyland as part of their massive expansion, which was called Chili Pepper. This was going to be Mystic Manor, Grizzly Gulch, and of course, the second version of Toy Story Playland. Although for that one, they just dropped the land and called it Toy Story Land, which is the name all the future Toy Story lands would have. This would have the same component list that the other one had in Paris: the RC Racer, the Toy Soldier parachute jump, and of course Slinky Dog. But now with differences. This Slinky Dog would have a much larger Lincoln Log house because of reasons like weather. The Lincoln Logs would not be precast in a factory, they'd be built on site. They would have a lot of effort spent because they had to look like they were disconnected when in fact they were one big unit. They also had to have the step lights. Same as Paris, but being in a different country, we had different lights. It also had a roof, a card roof, and that allowed a game to be created, which is a Slinky Dog game. And that would be coming back again to be used in Shanghai. The cards accompanied the board game, which was inside the box that the Slinky Dog came in. You could actually play the game. If you had dice or a spinner, it would work. I made sure of that. Slinky Dog was going to be coming to Shanghai, cards and all. But first, I had to deal with Toy Story Hotel.
The first Toy Story hotel that was designed and built in Shanghai Disneyland was meant to be a value hotel. It was also meant to respect the toy and the play patterns of our local Chinese guests. But it also had something else going for it. Although it was a value hotel, I intended it to be childlike but never childish. It was not going to be like the art of animation there in Disney World. It wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be plastic. It wasn't going to look cheap. It was going to have artwork. It was going to have nods to good design. It was going to be a large hotel at 800 rooms, but it was going to be a value hotel, a value as far as the quality of service and delivering of finishes. Overall, it was successful because it led to a second Toy Story Hotel. And I would like to say Toy Story Hotel 2.0 there with the Pixar Hotel, which is now open and available to stay in Disneyland, California.
But back to Shanghai, because I spent the next several months and years there in Shanghai working out of the toy box, which was our project trailer, or project building actually, working first on Toy Story Hotel, which was going to be a very large, value rated, but really richly detailed hotel with all the icons of the Disney Pixar Toy Story movie. The 800 rooms were divided over two wings. There was the Buzz wing and the Woody wing. And the way you knew which was when you followed the lenticulars, which I designed and had built there in central China. These were massive, and they presented a problem, especially the Buzz, because it's one lenticular as you read it, but you can't produce anything that large, so we had to create seam lines. Woody and Jessie, they were interesting, and they were a lot easier. Luckily, because the wall was much smaller than where the Buzz version would go. There was in the center of the hotel a clue that you were in the center of the hotel, because here in this figure 8, which I'd like to say was a homage to Buzz saying to infinity and beyond, that in this infinity figure 8, there was a set of tiles. And the reason the tiles were there is if you knew where you're going to be looking for them, you would realize, oh, this is where the center of the hotel is. Stepping inside, you can see these hotel tiles, and they serve their purpose. I wish I had them for the hotel hallways because they went on forever. But once you got to your room, you'd be treated by our old friend Slinky Dog, hanging there as a lamp overhead, and you'd see his spring, and around the corner you'd see his head. This whole idea was because I believe this motto, this saying that I instilled into everyone on the project team. It really paid dividends. Not so much in the case of, well, looking to build kites for the restaurant, because China does have a rich history of building kites of all kinds. And so with the project team members, I went to, again, central China, but now up north, uh, to see a number of kite vendors who were very busy. And they showed us around and they said, yes, yes, we could do the kites exactly the way you want them, exactly in the schedule you want them, and for the price. But as I've said before, not every idea is an idea that sees reality. And this is what we got with the Slinky Dog kite. The Slinky Dog kites, they're not bad. They're not terrible. They're just disappointing. The flat kites worked well, but the dimensional kites, no, they did not work at all. Even the Luxo ball was disappointing. There was a do-over because there was going to be another Toy Store hotel, this one in Japan at Tokyo Disneyland Resort. And there they went the more traditional way. They do not have a Toy Story Land. They probably will never have a Toy Story Land. So basically, they created all the Toy Story Land props, but they installed them in the hotel, which became a win-win. Back to Slinky Dog, back to the box, actually. Let's talk about that for a moment. I said earlier that the box was an actual play game, and you could do it. And you walk around the queue, and as you look around the queue, you'll realize there are these cards, and they give you instructions of how to play the game. And the whole idea is either for Slinky to be a good dog or a bad dog. No matter whether Slinky Dog is a good dog or a bad dog, you can't keep Slinky Dog down. And so when the time came to build another Slinky Dog there in the fourth Toy Story Land to be built at Disney's Hollywood Studios, this was not going to be the traditional Slinky Dog that had been built 3 times before. This was going to be a coaster, a family coaster, which that park really needed, because they didn't have much as far as coasters except for Rock and Roller Coaster, which I designed, but it was intentionally a thrill coaster with a launch and multiple inversions. Here, it was going to be a family coaster, a launch, but a family coaster nonetheless, built by our friends at Disney, Mock. Mock Rides has a history with Disney, not a deep history, but they do have one. Guests riding Slinky Dog Dash are treated to 2 launches and a grand tour of Toy Story Land, with an occasional peek over the trees to Galaxy's Edge. The ride itself is quick. It delivers on the thrill factor that you would expect. It has a lot of nods to the world of Andy's backyard, even down to the fence that separates Andy's world from the world of his neighbors. In this case, a parking structure. The ride is not overly long, but it is satisfying. As I said, there is a launch just after the station, and then you have a big drop and a circle around Jesse and Rex, and then you make a tour, and then you travel some more with some banking angles, and then you have a head cropper and another banking angle, and then you make a turn. You think you're done, but you're not, because you come to a full and complete stop. And you start to get the idea that this is not over yet. You're drawn back, and then the launch in Andy's backyard is activated. And you are accelerated. Not hugely, but again, for a family coaster, you really feel like you're moving. You go up the hill, and this is where you get a peek of Galaxy's Edge and a drop over the or near the backstage area and warehouses. And there are some bunny hills and drips. And then over there, there's a Well, you get the idea. It's a lot of fun. And as I said, it delivered on the need to provide a family coaster to Florida, this park especially. And at the very end, you've got our old friend Squeaky, who serenades you at the end of the ride. It doesn't get much better than this for a coaster, and it delivers on all the components that you want. There is some space inside the coaster if they wanted to do another flat ride. What that might be, I had some ideas, but we'll have to wait here patiently to see if any of it comes to fruition. Although Slinky Dog was a minor character in the Toy Story movies, he became very popular, and he found his way around the world in various forms. Each one was different. Sometimes the changes are big, and sometimes they're very small. But it doesn't matter, because in every single case, Slinky Dog has always proved himself to be a very good dog.
I see Slinky Dog over there scratching at the door. So I'm going to bring this episode of Disney Journey to a close. I'll have another new episode next week. In the meanwhile, before I go, I want to thank these people for supporting my channel. These channel members keep me going, and I want to thank them. So please consider becoming a member. In the meanwhile, until next time, it's goodbye from Lost Canyon.